Hi, welcome to the Israel First television program with myself, Martin Blackham. Natalie's behind the scenes today, but she says hello to you. A program that looks at Israel, we look at the news, and in the BBC News it says Red Sea diving resort, the holiday village run by spies. This was featured in BBC News, and we're with Gad Shimron. Thank you so much, Gad, for welcoming us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you with us in the program. So a fantastic program, and you're not going to want to miss any of this. And we're talking today, there's a new film out on Netflix. It's called The Red Sea Diving Resort with Chris Evans. That's recently been released on the Netflix channel. And we're going to be talking about the book Mossad Exodus, Gad Shimron. And Gad was there. You were one of the people, one of the participants.
One of the spies.
One of the spies there. So fantastic to be able to talk to you today about that. Gad Shimron is an Israeli journalist. He's an author. He's an expert on military affairs. He was born in Tel Aviv, and during the 1970s and 1980s served with various units of the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence organization. He's worked as a journalist with Maritime, Israel Radio, and as a presenter on Channel 1 Television's Good Morning Israel. So you're used to doing television?
I feel at home.
He's the author of 7 books, including the Mossad Exodus. He's done other books as well, which I recommend for you to go and have a look at. And we're going to be talking about that today. The book tells the story of the daring undercover rescue of Ethiopian Jews from Sudan using the Arus holiday village as cover. And Gad, so thank you so much for giving us your time today. It's an amazing story, and you've done the book. And by the way, I just recommend that to you. They can get that from Amazon, and our friends at Geffen Publishing. You can go at their website and have a look at that. If they get the book, what does it? It tells the whole story. Tell us a bit about. What's in it?
It's not a history book.
Right.
It's not a history book, and it's not an official book. It's my own personal experience in the Sudan in the early 80s, in this unique operation of saving the Ethiopian Jews and helping them fulfill the 1,000-year-old dream of coming to Zion. And I want to stress one point from the beginning. The real heroes of the stories are the Ethiopian Jews, not us, the Mossad people, and not the Israeli Navy and Israeli Air Force who participated in these very dangerous operations. The Ethiopian Jews are the real heroes, and for one main reason. What they went through in order to come to Zion, to fulfill their dream, an average Israeli like myself, I think we would have survived 2 days, maybe 3 days. And some of the Ethiopians, they survived for months in those terrible refugee camps.
Right. So just to explain that the Ethiopians couldn't get back, there was no way for them to return to Israel. They were in refugee camps, and the only way to get them back was to bring them through Sudan, and which was a perilous journey, I understand. That's from reading the book. And Israel bought this holiday village, this Arus.
Yeah, I will. If I may give some background.
Right.
Ethiopian Jews were cut off from Jewry for 1,000 years.
Okay.
And then only in the 70s they were recognized as Jews, and therefore the law of return.
So who recognized them? Was that Israel? Or?
First of all, the chief rabbi at the time, and then the minister of interior. And once they were recognized as Jews, they were allowed. They have the right of return to come to Israel. And at the time, there was a civil war in Ethiopia, and there was a communist regime in Ethiopia, and therefore they started running away to Sudan, which was as you said, a very dangerous trip. Many of them lost their lives on the way. But they went to Sudan because at the time, Sudan, even though it was an Arab country and hostile, very hostile to Israel, in relative terms, it was kind of a paradise in Africa. And there were millions of refugees from all over Africa in Sudan. And they ran to those refugee camps, which, by the way, in comparison, the Palestinian refugee camps in the West Bank are Beverly Hills in comparison to those refugee camps in Sudan. And from there, they somehow managed to send a cry, please bring us to Israel. And that's when the Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, called the chief of the Israeli Mossad, Chaka, Yitzhak Chofi, and told him, bring me the Jews of Ethiopia. Now, I say it's a unique operation.
So it had to be done in a clandestine fashion. It couldn't be done in official
Because
ways.
at the time,
Right.
Sudan was an Arab country, it was a hostile country, and for the Mossad it was a black hole. I mean, it was far away in Africa, it was the biggest country in Africa at the time, a very third world country, no infrastructure, nothing. And I mean, if the Prime Minister of Great Britain would tell the chief of the MI6, bring me 10,000 refugees from somewhere in the world, the chief would look at the Prime Minister and say, sorry, sir, it's not my job. I bring intelligence, And I think this is one of the really special things about Israel. The chief of the Mossad said, difficult, possible, we'll do it.
Wow.
And by saying we'll do it, one day I found myself in Sudan.
Wow. Wow, and the route was the route is quite interesting. If I can just grab the paper with that on, I can get that on the camera. But the route was very interesting, Gad. You had to travel from, or the migrants had to travel from Ethiopia, and I guess the camps were near the border.
Right, they were near the border.
Right?
Near the border, they crossed to the border. For some of them, it was 400 kilometers march. For some of them, with bandits and with police and army and hostile. I mean, there were terrible cases of rapes and robbery.
It was a miracle to get to the refugee
It was a miracle
camp.
to get there. Now, the problem was how to get them out of these very unusual circumstances and places. And the first method was by small groups with the help of a very benevolent Christian aid organization that agreed to give bona fide refugee cards to those people. They say, we don't mind if they're Jews or Muslims or Christians, they're refugees. And the Mossad managed through this organization to bring out in small groups, family here, family there, through the Khartoum airport to Europe and from there to Israel. But this was on very small quantity. And we needed a modus operandi, a way to work in Sudan and bring masses of Jews.
You couldn't really knock on the door and say, you have Jewish people in your camp and we've got a bus parked in the refugee camp car park.
No way.
Would you like if they go?
No way.
It all had to be done.
It had to be secret, covert operation. And then one day, Danny Limor was the chief of the operation at the time. While traveling around Sudan, he found this deserted diving resort about 40 kilometers north of Port Sudan. And you have to understand, there is a 700-kilometer stretch of shoreline of Sudan on the Red Sea with 2 cities, 3 villages.
Which is the
right here
with the Rus in the center, I guess.
And Rus is the name of the village.
Okay.
And the distance, by the way, it is like as if Israel would coordinate operations somewhere in southern Italy. Just imagine the distances. And he found this place and he said, oh, that's a good idea. And it was deserted. There were Italian businessmen who opened the place and they went bankrupt after a few weeks and they ran away. And a cover company was established in Switzerland. If you remember the movie Argo, actually there was a girl sitting next to a telephone. If somebody would have called and say, is this a Rus diving resort company? Say, yes, it is. That was their job. And
so the Mossad bought the...
We didn't buy it, actually. Right. We leased it from the Sudanese government for, I think, $300,000.
And you even did your own brochure.
Renovated the place. We established a real diving resort with a real operation. And actually the village, after reconstructing it, started functioning and it was even making money.
Now the village, Gad, was for diving specifically. I mean, you could go there and I guess sunbathe, but was that the specific scuba diving? And
it was, Sudan, among divers, the Sudan shore is paradise. Jean-Jacques Cousteau, if you remember this
The French...
the god of
right.
underwater diving. He made many films around in Sudan, and there was no infrastructure for divers at the time.
Are you a diver
We were the only
yourself?
ones. No, I couldn't. I had an accident a few years ago. I couldn't dive.
Right.
I had to, just float around with a snorkel and see the beauties of the Red Sea. But each one of us had a job, Some were responsible for yoga, yoga drills, and others were diving instructors. Myself, because I knew some windsurfing, actually we imported the first windsurf to Sudan. Wow. In a direct Israeli Air Force flight to Sudan.
Now,
I was a windsurfing instructor.
But we talk about this, and it was an amazing operation that to send Israelis to a Muslim country. You now got this resort, but how did you actually physically get the Jewish Ethiopians from the refugee camp? We said you couldn't knock on the door. How did you get them to the sea? I guess it was the sea, wasn't it, you first used?
There were two phases, and I will go into it. But you have to understand, as a white man in Sudan, you need a good cover story to go around, because, it's like an elephant in a porcelain shop once you come somewhere. You arrive somewhere. So the holiday village gave us the opportunity to move around, driving to Khartoum to bring supplies, looking for new diving locations, etc., etc. And the idea was like this. Let's say once in 3 weeks, we had contact people in the refugee camps, very, very courageous young Ethiopian activists who knew who is Jewish. Through them, we gave some money and medicine, not too much, because somebody with $10 in the refugee camp will be robbed in 5 minutes. So we gave them, through them, some help to the refugees, to the Jews. And we would tell them, Friday, this and this date, at 8 o'clock, you come with 200 refugees to a place which is 5 kilometers away from the refugee camp.
Now we've got to remember that this is in Africa before without telephones, without communications, without email, without anything. You had to communicate.
Mouth to ear. That's the only way to do it. And so we had a contact man who was responsible for telling and updating those very courageous committee youngsters. And the operations were always done on Friday, because on Friday, you have to understand, there was one road in the Sudan at the time. Every 50 or 60 kilometers or so, there was a roadblock. Police, army, internal security service, whoever. And on Friday, most of them were drunk, because Friday is a free day, and they drink these dates, arak. If you or I would drink it, we would be blind in 5 minutes. It's lethal, this arak. And therefore, all the operations were always on Friday evening. And we would, through our contact men, tell the committee people, organize 200 people at this point, somewhere 5, 2, 3, 4 kilometers from the refugee camps. We would come with we came with our trucks and lorries.
That was from the resort?
From the resort. And we had different cover stories why we leave the resort, like going to bring equipment from Khartoum, or going to have a party with the Swedish nurses at the Red Cross hospital in Kassala, and all kind of funny stories that you could tell at the time when there were no mobile phones. Today you cannot tell the stories anymore, because it's very easy to verify. And we would come at the designated time to this pickup point. And I remember those nights that you wait around 8 o'clock and you see nothing, and all of a sudden there is a whistle, and you see 200 people, they were 10 meters away from us.
So was the whistle the signal?
The signal for them to come to the...
you blew the whistle, and...
The commander, he said he gave some kind of a signal, and all of a sudden we would see 200 children and elders and women and men. We didn't notice them before, it's amazing.
So they were hiding somewhere?
They were hiding, and they rise up. We would really cram them into the trucks and start driving, crossing the roadblocks on different excuses, every roadblock a different excuse.
We should explain about the roadblocks just for a second. These are quite frightening. If you've not been through a roadblock in Africa at night, you don't realize, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if the guy, they're armed, I would imagine, all the time. And these people are unpredictable. So you've got all these people.
And drunk.
Right. And you've got all these people
they couldn't
in the
see
back
them.
of the truck.
They couldn't see them. We had, the trucks were covered. They couldn't see them.
Oh, okay. So right.
And of course, the last thing we wanted is some drunken Sudanese soldier peeping into the truck and seeing this, 80 people crammed there.
Right.
So there was one, people think about James Bond and shots, nothing. The best system was, and this Danny, he was something. I admire his imagination. He found that for some reason the soldiers or the policemen at the roadblocks, they love cigarettes, of course, and they love whiskey, and they love French toasts.
Oh.
They call it ash francaoui, French bread. So, and we knew where the roadblocks are. So the usual system was that, let's say 50 kilometers before arriving at the roadblock, he would speed up, go by himself with his pickup, which was empty, to the roadblock, go to the officer in charge and give cigarettes to the soldiers and French toasts and whiskey and say, by the way, I have some lorries behind me, they belong to me, let them go through because we are in a hurry. And I will never forget this sight of Danny. We arrived with our trucks from a distance, and I see Danny standing on one of those barrels. The roadblocks are made of barrels, doing like a policeman. Go, go, go. And it worked one time after the other. It worked like a Swiss watch. Unbelievable. There were some cases it didn't work, and there were chases in the desert and some shots, etc. But 95% of the cases it worked out very well.
Was your heart beating as you came to the?
Of course.
Wow.
Adrenaline is part of the job. And once we would arrive at the beach, there was an Israeli Navy vessel going on the Red Sea under disguise of a civilian cargo ship. And there were teams of the Israeli Navy SEALs, what we call Shayetet 13. They would come with the rubber boats.
Well, commandos, really, I guess.
Yeah, the commandos.
English,
yeah, commando. It's like the Special Boat Service, SBS, or the SAS, if you want. And they would come to the place, always far away from the village. Again, there was a wall separating the village and the operations.
So you couldn't see from the village where this was happening?
Nothing. The village, there were expatriates dancing baga baga and drinking whiskey at the time. There was a party. And they would put on the boats, on those rubber boats, rubber dinghies, and to the Israeli Navy vessel called Bat Galim, and from there to Israel. Quite often, because the boat was there already, we would go back and make another operation, 1, 2, 3 operations, one after the other. And then they would sail to Israel, and this would be the end. But after the third or the fourth naval operation, we had a major incident with the Sudanese army ambushing, not us. They were looking for smugglers.
Right.
But they found us, and there were shots, and I was shot at, the other people were shot at, and 4 of our guys were caught by the Sudanese army. But again, Danny was caught at the time. He understood that the officer in charge had no idea what happened in front of his eyes. Rule number 1 in intelligence work is to get into the head of the guy who is standing in front of you. And Danny, he grasped immediately that the officer had no idea what's going on. He came and he saw rubber dinghies coming and people, getting off trucks and going on the boats and leaving the shore. And that's why they waited till the last boat was on the shore, and then they attacked. And a friend of mine and myself, we pushed the last boat and we, managed to escape.
Could it have become like a battle because you've got IDF?
Yeah. Of course.
In rubber dinghies and the Sudanese army.
And it was funny enough that you mentioned it, because being the last one to leave the place, I told the Navy SEALs, wait, don't go too far away. I have to report back, because I heard in my earphone the commander of the Israeli Navy SEALs. He heard the shots. He was already, a kilometer away. He understood something is wrong, and he started organizing a raiding party back to rescue our people. And I, with a walkie-talkie, I described what's going on. And then all of a sudden, I saw Danny, with his hands standing out like this. There were 4 Israeli agents surrounded by 30 Sudanese soldiers with their fingers, on the triggers. Very, very frightening moment. But anyhow, Danny understood, and he started shouting at the officer. He took down his arms. He says, "Are you crazy? I'm working for the Sudanese tourist office, and we bring tourists to see the marvels of the Red Sea, night dives, etc. And you shoot at me, you shoot at our people. Tomorrow I fly to Khartoum, I'm going to complain to the chief of staff, he's a friend of mine." And the officer, he hesitated and said, "Okay, sorry," ordered his people and went away.
Wow.
Miracle. But we understood this is the end of the naval operations.
Right.
And then somebody came up with the idea, Sudan is such a huge country. At the time it was as big as Great Britain, Germany and France together. Most of it is desert. We find a place in the desert. We land Israeli Air Force cargo planes, and instead of driving the long way, the 600-700 kilometers to the shore, we land the planes 100 kilometers away from the refugee camps in the middle of the desert. And that's in June, I believe June 82, we started the aerial operations, which were really, they were a landmark in the history of also the Israeli Air Force. And there was one night, I think the place we operated was the busiest airport in Sudan, because we landed 3 airplanes, one after the other, in 15 minutes intervals.
So how could you land? And these are huge. These are large aircraft. They're not smaller, light aircraft. How could you land these huge transport aircraft without anybody noticing?
Well, first of all, because Sudan in the 80s, it was an empty country. Not completely. There was one case where the Sudanese understood something is going on, and they even fired a SAM-2 anti-aircraft missile, but they missed, of course. And when between the operations, we came to Israel for short leaves, etc. And for myself, I received a special training, to find which part of the desert is solid enough to take a landing by these huge airplanes and be able, the pilot will be able to take off again, full cargo.
So did you have to light the air, because you did this at night?
Yeah, we had
special lights.
We had special lights, and we had special, we call it pentometer. It's something that you put in the ground and you see how deep it goes, and by this you know how many layers of sand you have that can take, how many landings this specific piece of sand can take. And we moved from one place to the other, but really it was like in the movies, if I may say. And this moment, you sit in the desert, you are on top of the pickup, and you see the stars, and you see aeroplanes at 30,000 feet flying, etc. And there's a complete, it's quiet, like you can only have in the middle of the desert. And all of a sudden you start hearing the bzzz, and you hear the pilot speaking in Pinglish. We call it Pinglish, Palestinian English. Right. This is number 7, how do you read me over? Like this. And we would communicate with him, and he would tell us, yes, I see your lights. We had very dim lights, but he had those night goggles. And all of a sudden you see this huge shadow, and the sound, and it's 5 meters above your head, landing on the sand. They have to reverse the propellers in order to stop, and you have this unbelievable huge cloud of sand going in the air. We were sure you could see it in Khartoum. Couldn't, okay? And it would stop, and then the ramp open, and a few soldiers would go out and to secure the perimeter. And the funny thing is that at the first time we made a mistake. We didn't understand that the Ethiopian Jews, all of them, have never seen an airplane in their life, okay? And the sound and the dust and the noise, they started running away. So we had to, in the middle of the desert, to gather them up again. Right. Later on, we developed systems how to control the situation. And some years later, I met one of those Ethiopians who was on the first flight, And he told me, Gadi, I felt straight out of the Bible. I felt like Jonah getting into the belly of the whale.
Wow.
Because, you know, he'd never seen something like this in his life. And 3 hours later, he was an Israeli citizen. Unbelievable.
Wow. Just from personal experience, from where the studio is, where we film from, we are not far from the Mevasaret Absorption Center. We've been there. I went there once with a Ethiopian pastor, and he was talking to them in their language. And I've seen from personal experience, I know there's racism and I know things go on, but from personal experience, I've seen they are not only being absorbed into Israeli society, but they feel very much part of Israeli society, and you see them working security guards and different things.
Much more than that. I think, unlike what you read in the newspapers, in the media, it's a huge success story because the number of Ethiopian youngsters who go to the universities is going up dramatically every year. And the number of families getting out of the, let's say, lower echelons of society, I mean, economically and socially, is getting up, getting better all the time. And I remember meeting in the Addis Ababa airport a few years ago. I met a group of young Israeli Ethiopian girls after the military service. They went to see, you know, where their parents came from. And one of them recognized me and she said, Gadi, we went back to the villages where girls our age go down with a pot on the head to bring water, and then they herd the goats and the cows, and I go to university. So you understand what you have done?
Wow.
And I said, yes, I do.
Well, thank you so much, Gad, for being our guest today on the Israel First television program. Great to have you.
My pleasure sharing this great story.
To tell us all about this book, The Mossad Exodus, an amazing story of the daring undercover rescue of the lost Jewish tribe. And don't forget, you can email us if you want. That's info@israelfirst.org. Visit the website www.israelfirst.org. And remember, we're the program that looks at the land, the people, and the language.